Yo guys, F1 here. So today I've decided to do a bit of a guide slash tutorial video on how to get better as a pilot in Battlefield 1. As some of you might know, uh, dogfighting is not necessarily a thing in Battlefield 1 and there's a few reasons for that. However, I find it quite boring because most people rather really suck at piloting or they just go for the close air support route, which is a viable option. However, as if you don't take down the enemy pilots, then they also can give their team close air support, which is not good for your team in return. So the goal of this video is to hopefully create some good pilots out of you guys so we can actually get some dogfights going in this game. So, tip number 1, sorting out controls and your flying kit. When I first started playing the game, I found the controls to be very difficult, but with time, like everything, you sort of get used to them, which I did. However, I know some people who changed things up. For example, they put pitch up and pitch down to both spacebar and E, so they can get some good loops, but I'll talk about that later. And sorting out your flying kit, I found that the attack plane for close air support is pretty much the best kit. You might think otherwise, perhaps you like using the fighter pilot or fighter plane or some other form of attack plane. With the close air support attack plane, I found that you're able to not only get a good strong cannon in the front, but also you have those bombs for anti-infantry. So it's the best of both worlds, and that's the one I would recommend to use. Tip number 2. Definitely this is an important one, and one that's probably the most helpful, is put your flying sensitivity to 200%. At first, it felt really sluggish when I was trying to turn. With 200%, it also kind of felt a little bit slow, but over time I kind of got used to it, and 200% definitely gives you a big advantage in turning and maneuvering around enemy planes. Tip number 3, always fly in third person. I cannot stress this enough. If you still fly in first person, I do not know what you're doing. If you fly in third person, it gives you a lot more awareness of your surroundings and how close you are to the ground, but also where the enemy is, whether it's on your tail or somewhere in front of you. It just overall gives you another big advantage over everyone else. Tip number 4, using the radar. Sometimes when the enemy plane is not in sight, you can just use the radar, and if he's spotted, then you know his exact position. Another form of radar that I found to be useful, well, it's not really a radar, but if you have a rear gunner in your plane and you see him shooting at the enemy plane that you've lost sight of, if you just follow those bullets where your gunner is shooting, because he has a 360 view, that means he can see the enemy plane at all times. So just follow where he's shooting and you should end up on the enemy's tail. Tip number 5, using the rear gun. Now, this is a pretty controversial part of Battlefield 1 planes because pretty much anyone can just level out horizontally and switch seats to engage the enemy. Rather, they're on their tail or the person is just not in a position to engage the enemy because, like I said, you have a 360 view. You can basically shoot the enemy from any position. I will say though that it may not be to your advantage sometimes, because if you're just stationary in the air, basically not moving at all, the enemy plane will most likely be able to chew you up really fast. Tip number 6, this also kind of ties in with being a rear gunner, is where to shoot the enemy planes, and also, of course, when you're engaging a plane. So, as you might know, in this game you have damage models, so if you shoot a plane's wings, then that plane will most likely have that wing disabled, which is really useful, and that's what I find myself doing in most dogfights. You have to shoot a very important part of the plane, even like disabling the engine, which is a little bit harder, but that will put you in an insane advantage over the enemy. Knocking out the plane's wings puts you in the biggest advantage, really, because they have a really hard time maneuvering now. So definitely shoot for the plane's wings or ailerons, for example, the tail. They can't really pitch up or down with the tail being destroyed. So learn to shoot at very important parts of the plane because it will put you at a very strong advantage. Tip number 7, maneuvers. Like I said before though, because dogfighting is not really a thing in this game, I am yet to learn a lot of maneuvers, and past maneuvers I've learned in previous titles like Battlefield 3 do not seem to really work due to the airspeed of the airplanes. So you basically have to just develop your own and see what works through time and testing. One maneuver that I like to do, however, this is probably the most popular one, I guess, is what I call the scissor roll, which was in previous titles, but it's a little bit different in this game. I'll most likely just show you guys on screen because it's pretty difficult to kind of explain what you're supposed to be doing. But over time, it is pretty simple to do. What I like about this maneuver is that the enemy always seems to just get confused when they see it, and kind of you end up behind them all the time, which obviously you can gun them down a lot easier then. Tip number 8, taking note of your surroundings. So if there's, for example, a behemoth that has anti-aircraft capabilities, which is all of them really, you might not want to stick around in that area, but you can also use that towards your advantage if it's on your team. If you're having trouble in a dogfight, then you might want to just slide over to where the behemoth is, so you're in friendly airspace where your team can help you take out the enemy. This also goes along with any stationary AA guns, and you know that pretty much anyone can just hop on it and take you down within a few seconds. So keep that in the back of your mind, because sometimes when you think the coast is clear, it really isn't. You can also use your surroundings towards your advantage when an enemy is on your tail and you're having trouble shaking them off. For example, in Giant's Shadow, if you go through where C is, through the fallen Zeppelin, there's a little clearing which you can go through, and if you're confident in going through that clearing, then you totally should, because your enemy might not be confident and just crash, or divert into a different direction because they don't want to go through that clearing. Another example is on Ballroom Blitz. Everyone knows and hates it. The little cross, I think it is, or antenna, or whatever it is on the tallest building. Everyone seems to crash into that, and if you kind of navigate yourself around it, then your enemy might actually crash into it. Tip number 9, breaking tails. Now, breaking tails is quite hard in this game, I will be honest. For example, if there's a fighter behind you and you're in attack plane, you automatically know that that fighter is a lot more maneuverable and faster than you. So use their advantages to your advantage as well. If the fighter is legit right on your tail, then you might want to, for example, de-accelerate, and they will most likely end up in front of you then, because they are still accelerating and they couldn't anticipate that move from you where you are de-accelerating, so you end up behind them. Another good way of breaking a tail is, like I said before, if you have pitch up and pitch down assigned to another key besides your mouse, because if you have any experience flying, then you know your mouse is not a perfect option for getting a very tight roll and a perfect roll. So if the enemy doesn't have this assigned to a key, then you will have a greater chance of ending up behind them, because your roll is a lot tighter than theirs, and you end up going faster than them. It may sound pretty complicated, and this is pretty much the best way I can explain it, but it pretty much all just comes through experience and time. You might just want to go into an empty lobby or a safe corner of a server and just practice these rolls and see what they're all about. Tip number 10, knowing when to repair and when to show weakness. So pretty much you should only repair if you know the coast is clear and you just taken down the enemy plane, but you should know that the enemy plane will be back in about a minute when it respawns. So within that minute time frame, you have a chance to not only give some air support towards your team, but also repair if you need it. And what I mean by showing weakness is, if you know when the enemy plane is gonna spawn, then you should always end up behind them when they spawn. This is a pretty chump move if you're already shooting them when they just spawned, and if you're still looking for some dogfighting experience, then you should just let them fly for a while until they get into a position where they're ready to dogfight, because that's the only way and the best way to gain experience of dogfighting. So when the enemy spawns, you should probably not shoot them, but still put yourself at an advantage when they do spawn. Tip number 11, shit happens. Sometimes, as you might know, concrete trees or a random tank shell, or again concrete trees might kill you. Even the best of the best pilots know that that is just part of the game and it happens. So you should not get upset or rage about you crashing or not winning the dogfight, because you should learn from that and maybe next time you won't crash. So definitely learn from your mistakes, but you shouldn't get upset if you do make a mistake, because you'll learn from it and it won't happen again. And finally, tip number 12, practice is key. I cannot stress how important practice is and how important it is that you don't think like you're going to be perfect right out the gate. It takes a long time to get really good at dogfighting, and I'm still not the best, and you're probably nowhere near the best, but you can always improve, and there's always a room to improve. So yeah, guys, that was my tips. Tell me what you think. If you have any tips of your own, definitely leave them in the comments below. If you found this guide helpful, then make sure to leave a like. If you didn't, then you know what to do. If you like my voice or my personality, make sure to subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next one.